Okay, we're now recording. We basically have a free floor for anyone who'd like to ask a question about SourceCred or just say something you find interesting. Um, yeah, by all means, go ahead.
So what's been going on with SourceCred lately?
Thank you for asking. So maybe it'd be can't minimize Zoom while you're recording this meeting. Okay, sorry, Zoom. Uh, so yeah, let's see. SourceCred. So one thing to note is that we published this sort of plan for 2019, which you can find in the SourceCred/mission repository. So basically, SourceCred/mission is going to have like logistical or high-level planning for the project, while SourceCred/SourceCred has all of the actual code base. I have an ambition that someday we'll split SourceCred into like smaller pieces that are functional, but right now it's convenient to have a monorepo. I think that the biggest exciting thing is that we're starting to have new people contributing to the project, such as yourself, Anna, and such as Brian Litwin, whose PRs I've been really excited to see. So that's really cool, and I think that for me a big emphasis in this quarter is going to be just community building for the project. I think that SourceCred is really a social technology in the sense that we're trying to come to a social consensus about like who deserves cred in a project and which things do we value. And so I think that building a community of people who are excited to try this out, who are excited to like dog food it for SourceCred, is really like absolutely vital to the success of the project. So yeah, I think for me personally, documenting things like Brian, you asked a bunch of great questions in the Discord that reminded me that documenting how the plugin system works is really important. And having events like this office hour are all sort of important aspects for the project.
Do you want to? Can you go over the way that we grab stuff from GraphQL?
Yeah, William, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let me first ask if you have any particular questions, because that's a great question that has answers that can attack various levels of depth depending on what you care about.
I guess I'm used to just like composing a query in a string in JavaScript and sending it off to their API and getting back a response. And I wasn't able to find where we do that in the code base.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, you're right. So that is what we do. It all boils down to strings, of course, string queries. The thing that you'll run into pretty quickly if you try to send a query to GitHub's GraphQL service is that it's paginated.
Right, yeah.
You can only request 100 nodes at a time, so like 100 issues, 100 comments on an issue. And so all we need to do is when we want to request something that has 300 issues, like request the first 100 and then request the next 100 and the next 100, and then you're done, and stick them in a list. We also, this kind of has a recursive structure. You have a repository that has 500 pull requests, and each one has 15 pull request reviews, and each review has 20 comments. And so you kind of want to, you can request multiple kinds of things in one query. So you want to take advantage of that when we can. And there's nothing conceptually hard about this. But it turns out that getting the details right and tracking the state is not entirely trivial. So the portion of the code that you want to look at is source/GraphQL. There is a module there called schema. Schema is where we define what the remote GraphQL database that we're interested in looks like. So we basically copy over parts of the GitHub database schema, but only the parts we care about. So like we say the pull requests have a title, but we don't list that they have assignees because we don't track that data. And then there is a module called mirror, and mirror maintains a local mirror of the subset of the remote database that you care about. So the API for mirror is you give it a connection to GitHub, and you give it the GitHub schema that you care about, and then you can ask it like, okay, give me this repository, and it will fetch that repository and transitively all its issues, pull requests, all the people involved in that. It'll follow all the links for you and give you a nicely formatted JavaScript object. If you just care about the queries, there's a module called queries that like source/GraphQL that lets you build the queries, but that's pretty simple and self-contained.
Okay.
Yeah, Mirror has a bunch of code to it. I think it's well documented.
Uh-huh.
It basically maintains a local SQLite database that mirrors the remote database and sends a query and updates the database and then computes the next query to send. Again, it's not conceptually complicated, but there's kind of a lot of tracking to do. There are some design constraints that we wanted to maintain, like that at any time, it's when you're designing a solution to this problem, it's easy to find a solution that's kind of hard to inspect. Like if something goes wrong, you just lose all your state, or you don't know. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what caused the problem. And we also want it to be the case that you can, at any point, pause the download, basically, and resume it later. And because sometimes, like, large repositories can take minutes or even hours. On, like, the Bootstrap repository took, like, half an hour or an hour last time we tried. And, like, if there's code or your network dies, that's really awful to have to restart. So the performance that you're looking at is like a query takes just a couple seconds. So if your network dies, you'll lose only a couple seconds, and then you can pick up exactly where you left off. That is the high-level overview of the system. Again, if you have more specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, welcome Henry and Linda, who I see just joined the call. We're just kind of in general office hours, so if there's anything you're curious about, feel free to ask questions. Welcome comments as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, comments or questions in chat are also fine, of course.
Yeah, we also had a cool. Well, I mentioned I was talking to this a person who's thinking about maybe doing part-time PMing for SourceCred, and he had a really cool suggestion that I think we should think about implementing, which was making it easy for projects to embed the SourceCred output into their README. So if we just had a little script that would like load the SourceCred data and then produce an SVG that had like the scored totals in like a pretty little graphic, we could put that on the top of our README and have a script that just like updates it every week. And I think that'd be like a cool little artifact, that people could see and then be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I want one for my project. And then we just have like a little like guide on how to generate it for your own project. And that might be another way of just getting SourceCred outputs in a place where people see them. Although I think what we would really want to do there, I think that in terms of making cred like interesting thing to look at, it'll be hugely impactful. We can do time-based cred so that we have some way of saying, okay, here's the cred for the whole project historically, and then also here's the cred for the past month. And then that'll be kind of a faster updating thing. That'll be kind of more exciting to like see your name rise quickly.
I agree with that.
Yeah, you could have like a section for meaningful contributions by new users or users who are picking up increasingly valuable contributions or more contributions or something.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's really easy to get into a state where it just always says like 20% this person, 10% that person, long tail everyone else.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think this is where it gets to like trying to develop SourceCred as a social technology that like is engaging to communities and that people like find meaning in. Like I think that's a really important orientation to take. It might not even be that hard to like, what we need to do is we need to figure out whether it's the nodes or the edges in the graph that have timestamps. But actually getting those timestamps from GitHub or Git wouldn't be that complicated, like modification to our existing system.
Yeah, fetching the data is not hard. Finding out the right semantics is the hard part.
Right. Which kind of also comes back to documentation in terms of like we should have documentation for exactly what the semantics of the algorithm are right now, so that it serves as a touchstone for discussing what the semantics of changes like adding timestamping should be. Any other questions?
I'm just looking through the contributions welcome issues right now.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should also have like difficulty tags. Some of them are like really trivial changes that I just made an issue for because I didn't have time to do it right then. But it's like document this particular fact or write a simple change. And contributions welcome easy is different than contributions welcome, but will take some design work and thinking about how this interacts at a social level or at a cred level. So I don't know. That might be something we want.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A tag I've seen common is good for beginners, so I think that might be good to add, or good first PR.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those are nice.
I kind of. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna. Those are good. Good when I see those. Those are inviting a good first issue or a starter task or whatever.
I quite like the idea of having like difficulty tags, like easy, medium, hard. Because if we use those tags consistently, that could be really interesting signal to cred, where like the cred you get from merging a PR that closes a hard issue would be, you know, some large multiple greater than merging a PR that closes an easy one. You know, of course, that like invites the question of like who does the classification of easy, medium, hard. But I think we're a small enough community that, you know, like William or I could just apply those tags and it'd be mostly pretty good signal. It would also be a good test case. You know, one of the systems that we really want to implement in SourceCred is this idea of heuristics that would basically allow anyone to put in plugin logic for how to like change the weight of a node. And right now we have one class of heuristic, which is that you can apply weights at the like, okay, you know, the default. If you open up the weight configuration in the SourceCred UI, you can go and see that like, by default, pull requests have twice as much weight as issues, and issues have like 2 or 4 times more weight than comments and so forth. But we can only do it on these very coarse-grained categories. And the full heuristic system would hopefully allow us to say things like, okay, if it had the label hard applied, then it's worth twice as much as something with a label easy applied, and so forth. Yeah, I might just go and do that, like create easy and hard labels and apply them.
Priority labels are nice too, I've seen. Like, is this going to block a release or something, or versus more of like a longer term thing?
Right.
This is a super nitpick, but in time you'd want to make sure that people aren't going to game the system by, if a maintainer wants to keep high cred, arbitrarily setting their own difficulty level.
Right. Yeah, I think
this is always high.
Yeah, I think the question of like who watches the maintainer is an interesting one. I would hope at the least that, you know, my philosophy, my thinking here has often been like, well, first of all, actually, if you have an evil maintainer, that's just like a really bad situation to be in, or like the kind of like selfish maintainer, I guess. You can fork the project. You can kind of like apply communal pressure. Like the emphasis that I've been thinking is just making the system transparent, so it's really easy to see which. So it'd be really easy to filter, like, okay, you know, how much of this person's cred depended on the fact that we put a lot of weighting on the hard issues. Oh, okay, this person's cred was massively influenced by that, and they're the maintainer who's assigning these labels. So like we can see that that's suspicious and maybe raise an issue in the community being like, this doesn't seem super fair. But I think the maintainers do have a lot of power in that respect.
I mean, there's kind of a flip side with that too, right? That you expect, or at least it makes sense for maintainers to be solving the hard issues. So you would want to have some kind of like analysis tools that let you see, are they assigning, like when they label issues, irrespective of who solves the issues, are they picking the hard, you know, how is it like marginally distributed? And I don't know if like building all that analysis framework is something that we should do ourselves, or if we should make it easy to export the data to SQL or like R or something where people already know. I don't know.
Something in conversations between myself and Dandelion about SourceCred's game dynamics has been, or a theme that we've underlined has been that we probably want a system which rewards people for giving other people inroads and stepping stones into being useful to the project. And so figuring out, if we can figure out ways to reward people for helping others get ramped up on projects, get onboarded onto projects, that will provide kind of a preventative, I think that'll be a preventative measure to the what happens if there's an evil maintainer question.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying like make sure that the incentives make it so that giving hard issues to newcomers is actually like something that benefits them over claiming all the hard issues themselves.
Sure, yeah. And perhaps like looking at the actions and subsets of work that have to go into making it possible for, or that go into making it feasible for a new person to take on harder issues, and having those things that have cred associated with them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have a question I'm curious about for Brian. What brought you to the project?
I really wanted an excuse to like learn React and JavaScript, actually. And the idea of cred attribution as feedback for programmers is really interesting to me. Because if you can get the feedback right, if you can actually build something that tells you whether you're getting better or not, that could be really, really useful to programmers to just understand how they're improving it, how they're improving their skills, you know?
Yeah, cool.
So it's a really cool problem, besides the fact that I kind of want to learn all the technologies involved too.
And how did you find out about SourceCred?
I got really involved in a project, a really cool like community in the iOS and Swift open source world, and I was looking for other projects like it essentially. So I built a website to like crawl for GitHub projects with a lot of inviting labels, and so all the contributions welcome label like flagged SourceCred.
Interesting.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
That is really interesting.
I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, there's not that many projects that have a bunch of labels that are like waving people in.
That is really interesting feedback.
I don't see. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you guys see a lot of projects? I mean, I'm actively looking for them, like that have like a lot of good first issues, help wanted, contributions welcome, for people for beginners basically.
I feel like I see them sometimes on large projects, like React itself, I think has good first issue, but when I see good first issue on a React issue, having never contributed to the React code base, it still feels kind of intimidating. I don't know. Like
it does, yeah. And there aren't that many. I mean, you guys have like, I want to say 14 maybe good for contributions welcome. They might have like 3 or 4 good first issues, I think, like last time I checked.
So wait, how did you go from working on this Swift project to tumbling into the SourceCred issues that are labeled good first issue or contributors welcome?
I was trying to build out this website and I was trying to find labels. So just by like manually looking around for labels that more labels to like add to this list that I was accumulating of that like point out issues for like beginners, right? Like your first issue or whatever. And so I think I found contributions welcome manually somewhere else. But and it turns out that this project I was working on in iOS and Swift, it's called GitHawk. They're like far and away the most inclusive to beginners. They have like at any given time like 20 starter tasks out, and the next one has like 8 or something. So it was kind of a one-off thing. I was looking for more projects like that, but that turned out to be like a one-off thing kind of in the iOS and Swift world.
Interesting.
Yeah, GitHawk's a really cool project actually. If you know people that are in trying to like get into the Swift world or iOS.
Do you have any advice for us on what else we could do to make the project welcoming and accessible?
The code walkthrough, like I think I mentioned in my first comment, is really, really cool. That's like waving people in. And the labels, like I said. Maybe like we just talked about a few minutes ago, I mean, maybe just if you want to add to the label list, being more explicit about the issues, that would be really good for a beginner.
Cool.
Because when I see the first, like good, like William was saying, like there's a difference between there's a difference between like a beginner issue and just like a help wanted contributions welcome issue to me when I'm looking at that and I don't know anything about the project.
Yeah, totally. Some of the issues marked contributions welcome are like a little bit more esoteric. Like we have that one about like writing a tokenizer for like the markdown tree.
Right, that meant like I don't want to do it right now. But some of that's good. Like, it is one self-contained. You could do it, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
Doesn't there exist?
Yeah.
I would have guessed that it exists.
Markdown
tokenizer.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, we wanted a good tokenizer.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of interesting to think like what exactly does contributions welcome mean? And I think what I've usually taken it to mean is that it's something that has like a limited amount of context that you would need to pick up. So like, figure out what the semantics should be for like incorporating date time information into SourceCred. Not contributions welcome. I mean, not that I wouldn't welcome contributions, I very much would, but there's a lot of context in the project you need to figure out before it's like really tractable. Whereas like putting like the noted edge counts in the graph, it's nice, like local in scope. You just need to like wire in a couple of new pieces of data together.
But I think there's also a flip side, which is the difference between adding noted edge counts to the graph versus writing this markdown tokenizer is that while neither of them requires a ton of context on SourceCred to begin with, by working on one of them and not the other, you will gain more context on SourceCred. If you write this markdown tokenizer, you don't know anything about, or you don't have to know anything about how SourceCred works. If you write if you're writing against the graph APIs and you have to update our test cases, and then you see how the test cases work and you look at some like sample code that uses those clients, that's like actually ramping you up as opposed to just like being something that you can do.
Right. And so I guess that's where actually having good first issue would be a nice distinction. And like actually, if we had good first issue, would we still need contributions welcome as a tag?
Maybe not.
No, I think we would want to go with one or the other.
Yeah.
One other than that, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
One other than that, like I'll actually find contribution welcome confusing in a lot of places because for me it's like it's not everything contribution welcome. It's like the rest I'm not supposed to touch that, and so for me that wording is really confusing. Because my default assumption, if I go to like an open source project, it's like, yeah, they'd like help unless like somebody said like I'm doing this, right? And so if there's like a label contribution welcome, I'm like, well, what about the others that don't have this label? What is that state of those? Are this just like the core maintainers are going to work on them and nobody else should be touching them? Which there are projects that work like this, right? And so that's for me actually pretty confusing.
Interesting.
It occurs to me that if we want to find low-hanging fruit for other ways to make the project welcoming and accessible to new contributors, we could potentially find people who haven't contributed yet and sit down with them and like do a video call and step through like looking at the repo with them and like hearing their prompts. I bet that would surface some interesting stuff.
This was actually something Linda suggested, was having a like sort of new contributor like help session, like writing your first PR. And if I recall correctly, I think Linda, you were actually suggesting like choosing a particular issue and then like walking someone through solving it.
Yeah, not entirely walking someone through, but maybe pair programming on it so that the beginner can try to lead on like how they would solve the issue, and if they get stuck, then the maintainer is right there to help.
Right. Yeah. So we could schedule one of these. I think that'd be a cool idea, especially if we have people who would want to like also be participating in it in the non-maintainer role.
Like mob programming, or
yeah, that could be cool.
I think, yeah, I mean, if it's a situation where both people, maintainer and contributor, are open to like other observers, then I think it could be pretty fun.
Yeah, I wonder what would be a good format for that. If we were going to have like, if we were going to be an open call, would it be like, you know, like let's say hypothetically we have 3 people who all want to be coding. Would we all be kind of coding together and one person would just be like kind of running the keyboard but with screen sharing on? Or would it be like 3 people working on the thing and then it's sort of like, you know, maintainers like context switching to like help people stay unblocked, or all, like, yeah, what do we imagine could work there?
I actually think either case would work well. It depends on what you want, essentially. I've been in like both types of Hangouts, and like the more I guess the one where there's a bit more mentorship is obviously going to be more helpful for someone who gets stuck easily and is free to ask for help. But the other type where everyone's like is already familiar with the project and is just working on their own thing and just kind of like a hackathon, that can also be really fun.
I would imagine that if it's a hackathon type thing where everyone is working, it sounds like working on different issues via video call, like it would be pretty tricky to maintain context. I would imagine that everybody might get kind of scrambled all over each other or trip over each other's feet.
Right. Yeah, the trouble is that, man, I was doing a VR thing with William yesterday, and we were all in this space with a green room and had headphones on. And the way that the audio worked was that everyone had a mic, and so when someone spoke, everyone would hear that voice, but it kind of felt like everyone was like a disembodied voice, and it was very like actually difficult to maintain context, because in person I can like look at one person, be talking clearly to that person, and everyone else can tell that they're not being talked at in that moment. And the digital space doesn't actually have like a conception of space as such. And so yeah, I'm imagining like if we were all in person having a hackathon, I could go and like walk over to different people's screen and be like, oh yeah, I see you're having this issue, without confusing or distracting everyone else. But you're right that in a hangout like this, it could easily be kind of a cacophony.
Yeah, in the hackathon type experiences, I think the weakness is that people who are just flyby contributors, they join and they're like, oh, I don't know what's happening, and then they end up not participating and they leave. So the core maintainers end up doing the bulk of the, yeah.
Got it. So maybe one way to do it would be to kind of have a schedule and say, okay, we're gonna have a 2-hour like block where we're doing like, you know, new contributor like support. And it'll just be first come, first serve. People can reserve like half-hour slots of that. And then whoever reserved the slot, like they will be like the person who's like doing the coding. And maybe if they're open to it, you know, other people could kind of come and watch, but it would still be like we would be helping that particular person on their particular development experience, so it doesn't get too confusing with the context shifts.
One other thing that comes to mind for me that really can be helpful is like live coding from the maintainer. So I really like to watch live streams of people coding, and I find that extremely interesting and also really, really good way to learn a project, because you get to see firsthand how somebody who's been working on the project for a while thinks and moves through the project. And so just basically, it's like looking over the shoulder, right? And then if they're like reasonably responsive in like a chat or something like that, then you can also ask them the question and like if you don't understand what's happening.
That's a really cool idea. I like that a lot. I would love to. I've actually been kind of thinking about doing this already. Like, yeah, I would be super happy to set up a time and just live stream like fixing one of the open issues for SourceCred.
I think both of those things. I'm sorry.
I was giving a thumbs up to that. That would be awesome.
I was just making note that I think both of those things would be really helpful. Both having maintainer go and live code an issue, but also a maintainer pairing with a first-time contributor on solving an issue. I think the combination of those things would provide really good visibility into the project, and like to what Friedel was saying, like seeing how the maintainers think about solving these problems, but simultaneously doing the pairing with a first-time contributor will I think will send this signal where other folks who are would-be first-time contributors will see this happening and be like, oh, so I can do this too. It's sort of a priming thing.
So I'm now thinking like, okay, maybe we could just combine these ideas, and like maybe next Thursday, hypothetically, I could do like an hour-long like live stream coding, and then at the end of that hour, we'd switch into like new contributor thing, or maybe they should be two separate events. But I kind of feel like the momentum for one could go into the other, and that could be cool.
I kind of was thinking they should be separate, but I'm not sure why.
So the thing that why maybe keeping them kind of separate would be important is that I feel that a lot of new-time contributors might not be comfortable of like displaying to the rest of the world them struggling through a project, versus like you would be very likely very comfortable like doing a screen share and talking about what you're coding because project you know what you're getting into.
Right.
That is the thing, like the one-on-one or like one-on-two like teaching of like first-time contributors is probably a much more private affair.
That
where the other is like a broadcast to the rest of the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So maybe what I'll do is come up with like do people think that 30-minute sessions would work for like new contributor kind of like one-on-one coding sesh?
Yeah, it sounds good for a baseline. I think you probably want to have some flexibility in being able to extend that if it's going well. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'd reliably get things solved in 30 minutes, but I think you would reliably outline the problem in 30 minutes and likely show some movement and progress.
Cool.
I feel like on the subject of being like, if I were a first-time contributor, I would be a little like embarrassed about like the questions I would probably ask, like I would be right now. But there's also a trade-off, like where it's like another way to contribute to the project. Like you're giving me your time, your half an hour, and so it can help other people to see my sort of embarrassing questions, basically.
So maybe it would be kind of like discretion of whoever's contributing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
should be public or private.
It should probably be just announced as private with like the option of like, if you're really comfortable with this, we would appreciate it if we can share it with others.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I like this idea.
Beginners tend to ask really good questions that maintainers often have no idea that it was an issue. So I think, yes, I totally understand it's kind of embarrassing to admit that you don't know things and that you're struggling, but the people who are willing to like have to share that with the world are good.
You can always pull those questions anonymized out though and put them in a document, or you record a video of like actually answering those questions independently, like without the context of this person asked them. So you have the questions, but it's not known who they're from if people don't want to be associated with them.
I'm imagining like a Q&A video now. Like this week, these are
I see a lot of videos in your future.
Yeah, I think that for me, the correlation is not causation, but in the wake of the SourceCred Code Buddies walkthrough, all of a sudden there were new contributors where there weren't any before. And so now, like, some part of my brain is like, like video. This is magic. We must do more video.
Correlation is certainly correlated with causation. So
It certainly is.
I think I was considering Linda's point about how it can be unnerving for newcomers to ask questions and show what they don't know. But in any opportunities, like finding any opportunities for underlining that questions from newcomers are actually helpful to the whole of the project because of what it helps to reveal is probably a really healthy practice.
Right. Yeah, we kind of had a little discussion about this and the issue that Brian posted, or the issue that got posted in response to Brian's question on the Discord, where we're like, yeah, Brian should earn credit in the fact that we don't need to update the documentation because he asked a good question and it wasn't really clear a priori.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, I think I'll noodle on this, and I actually really like this live streaming fixing an issue, so I'll just definitely do that. That seems fun to me. And probably, William, I'll sync up with you offline about your like availability and bandwidth, but we'll post some like maybe just a sign-up sheet where people can claim slots for like one-on-one SourceCred contributing help. Another thing, just logistically, I like having had this office hours. I'm wondering how people would feel about doing like maybe having like bi-weekly SourceCred office hours. Is that something that y'all would like to participate in? Getting some thumbs up. Okay, so maybe just to kind of keep things simple and consistent, I'll just schedule another office hours for the same time 2 weeks from now, and we can just kind of keep going from there. Also logistically, and I don't mean to imply that we're like ending office hours right now, but these logistics are things that I want to touch on. Since this is being recorded, I'm wondering, would anyone like to volunteer to produce some notes from the recording so that we can have it in textual format in our GitHub history?
I'll do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian.
No problem.
Cool. I also know, Brian, you had a bunch of like specific kind of questions about the SourceCred architecture in the Discord, which I'm pretty eager to chat about.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff is just new. I've never seen it before to me.
Cool. So yeah, I wanted to, because I knew that like the diving into like the specific details wouldn't be like everyone's top interest. So I just want to like make a transition point here. If anyone else has like sort of general project level questions, you can ask them now, and then we'll transition into like the SourceCred technical deep dive part of this meeting. All right, Brian, ask away.
What is how do the adapters work? Like,
yep. Here,
yeah.
let me screen share actually, because that'll make this.
You can
okay,
talk about the adapters. Yeah.
Screen sharing is always very dangerous on this computer because they're using Xmonad on a Linux box, but I think it'll work.
Oh, it worked. Lovely.
Okay.
Always flip the coin.
Yeah. I think I'm learning which buttons, if I push them, there are a couple different buttons I could push, and I think some of them are ruinous and some of them just work. Okay, so first let's just talk a little bit about plugins.
Okay.
Why is SourceCred built around a plugin architecture? So like we could have built the exact same SourceCred that we know today much more quickly, I think, if we hadn't cared about making sure that it would be easy to add new sources of data later. But we figured that getting data from just Git and GitHub would only ever be part of the picture, and we want to make it easy, let's say that we're a community that uses Stack Overflow a lot, or uses a discourse forum, or uses any other platform, or let's say we want to build tools so that people can like give each other kudos really easily and have that be incorporated into Cred. As you go out, maybe we're doing some work that involves scientific papers, and we want to be able to have papers and paper authorships and citations be reflected in Cred. We wanted flexibility to do all of this, and so we decided to build SourceCred with a core infrastructure for graphs that is deliberately decoupled from any domain-specific knowledge, like what actually goes in the graph, whether it's pull requests or issues or Git commits or scientific papers. And the adapters are basically the points, the interfaces that we use to interoperate between this like extremely abstract core piece of SourceCred and the actual data that comes in. And also, William, I invite you to like chime in and interrupt me anytime that you want to clarify something I'm saying. And I'll also say that this is an area that really needs not just documentation, but it kind of needs to be refactored a little bit to make a clearer interface. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the adapters. So there are two kinds of adapters. There are two high-level kinds of adapters, and then I think it's actually a little more complicated. But basically, the first thing that you do with SourceCred conceptually is you create graphs, and these graphs contain nodes of different kinds, and then you assign scores to these graphs. And that's what happens inside of the analysis module in SourceCred. And so analysis has this adapter called an analysis adapter. And it's really simple interface. Basically, if you have a plugin and that plugin wants to be able to participate in getting SourceCred scores, then your plugin needs to give me a declaration. And the declaration, let's take a look at what a plugin declaration is actually. So the plugin declaration, basically the plugin has a name, for example, GitHub. It has a node prefix, which is the prefix that every one of its nodes is going to share. So we have an easy way of finding all of the nodes that belong to that plugin. It likewise has an edge prefix. And it also has node types and edge types. Funnily enough, I actually have a pull request out that adds documentation to this class. Let's just pop over to this. So basically what the types are is it's a way of kind of abstractly grouping a category of related nodes. The node type has a name, it's got a prefix, and it's got a default weight, which is how much cred is going to, by default, what kind of the multiple on the cred that this will accumulate is. And likewise for edges, they have names. It's actually forward and backwards. So the references edge has a forward name of references and a backwards name of is referenced by. And the reason that the plugin needs to provide this information for the analysis adapter is basically that when we want to do analysis on a graph, we need to know how we're going to assign weights to different nodes in the graph. And this analysis adapter gives you exactly that information of like how the nodes organize into types and what weights are assigned to those types. So that's why we provide the declaration. And then we also have the load method. And the load method is just literally like, how do we load the graph? The assumption is that your plugin is going to provide some other function that allows it to generate and save the graph. And then here the analysis adapter basically says, I know I have a SourceCred directory, and I know that I'm interested in a particular repository. You give me this logic so that I'll be able to load the graph from disk. And so just for an example of this in action, let's go and take a look at the adapter for the Git plugin. Git is a much simpler plugin, and so it's a better one to look at usually. So this analysis adapter just returns the declaration, which we can find in this file. And the declaration, we've got a commit node type that has the name commit or commits. It's got a certain prefix. It's got a default weight of 2. And it has a has parent edge type, which connects a commit to its parent commit. And so the declaration is the plugin is called Git. It's got a node prefix, edge prefix, and it has these 2 types. And then the analysis adapter also provides this load function. And the load function is extremely simple. Basically, we know that the file path for the Git graph will be SourceCred directory /data / the repo ID /git /graph.json. And then we read that file. We parse it as JSON. And then we use the built-in graph deserializer to get that JSON back out. And that's basically all this analysis adapter is. It basically says, give me a little bit of top level information about your plugin and give me the graph so I can actually like merge it into the rest of the SourceCred graph and run PageRank on it. Questions, comments? Did that make sense?
Yeah, that's a pretty good explanation.
I think you should also go over, at least briefly, the app adapter.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to like pause at the analysis adapter before moving on to another adapter. But yeah, we can move now to the app adapter. So all this analysis adapter lets us do is compute scores for every node. But if we look at the SourceCred prototype, then we will see that it actually does some other stuff. It computes scores, but it also provides this rendering for us. So here that we have this link, William has the most cred, and this isn't rendered as a node address of like /sourcecred /github /user /wchargen. It's rendered as @wchargen, and it's actually a hyperlink to William on GitHub. And this means the fact that this worked, and you can actually see that commits are handled differently. So commits, it provides the commit hash as a hyperlink to that commit on GitHub, and then it provides the title of the commit, or the commit top message. And then like issues, it has a link to the number. It has that number of the issue with a link, and it's got the title of the issue. So there's actually a bunch of type-specific logic here that determines how we want to render these pieces in the Explorer. And that is where we have the app adapter. It probably should be called the Explorer adapter, actually. And let's see. But it's called the app adapter for historical reasons. And so now we can see that this actually has two pieces. It's got a static adapter and it's got a dynamic adapter. So why is this? Basically, I wish I'd written doc strings here, but I'll do it now. I'll pay down my documentation debt because I'm now already getting a little bit confused by why I made these things. But no, I remember. Okay, so the static adapter, so this plugin declaration is a really general utility. Because once again, we want to be able to know the name of the plugin. We want to be able to know what the types are, what the prefix is, so that we can find nodes that are owned by that plugin or edges that are owned by that plugin. And we again have this concept of loading. And we need to be able to load the graph. And we also need to be able to load these descriptions for every node. Now, the thing is that before we can get the graph and before we can get the node descriptions, we need to get data from the backend. So for example, if I want to be able to produce that pretty little node description for an issue, I need to have a bunch of information about that issue that's not in the graph. So I need to know the number of the issue, I need to know the title of the issue, and this is all stored in a separate database from the graph. If you ever want a history lesson on SourceCred, we spent about a month of our progress was just spent rewriting the graph, because we had originally written the graph so that it was simultaneously a graph and a database that could store arbitrary information. And so the graph could store like, the issue number and the message and so forth. And then there was one particular Friday where we realized that this had just been a horrible mistake. And we spent the next month rewriting the entire project to not have that assumption.
One of the problems with that was that we didn't realize that we were writing a database. And another problem with that is that we don't know how to write databases. So right. It was pretty important, we think, for the long-term health of SourceCred, to be able to intercept that and pull out the clean graph abstraction that we have.
Yeah, we were close to being the accidental maintainers of a really deeply half-baked relational database. And we're grateful to our past selves that we didn't go down that road. But so basically, the reason that the static app adapter and the dynamic adapter are separate things, the static adapter has all that information, which without having to do any async work. You don't have to make any requests to the backend for additional data. You just always have it. And that's nice because it means that stuff like this weight configuration piece that's showing us the weights on every type of node and edge, we don't need to wait and only conditionally render that after some promises have resolved fetching data from the backend. We just always have it available. And then there's some stuff that there's just no way to avoid the fact that to get the graph and to get all of the additional metadata that you need to compute node descriptions, you need to have loaded some data from the backend. And we don't, in general, know what data you need to have loaded. So the Git plugin doesn't actually need to load any additional data, if I recall correctly, other than the graph itself, because the commit hashes, no, sorry, it does need to load additional data, I lied. But it needs to load much less additional data than the GitHub plugin. And by having this adapter at the interface level, SourceCred kind of doesn't care what your data looks like. You know, are you loading a JSON blob that has data? Are you loading a SQLite database and instantiating in memory? Are you actually not loading anything, but just like just in time, like proxying requests to go get stuff in the backend? No, sorry, that wouldn't work because of the interface is not async here. But basically, the plugin is able to abstract over its data however it wants. All it needs to be able to do is eventually provide this adapter that has these functions defined on it. And the functions are the graph method that gives you the graph, the node description method that, given a particular node address in the graph, gives you a little like React renderable that you can put in at the description. And then it needs to have a way of getting back to the static adapter, just kind of that's convenient to have there. So that's the story with adapters. And once again, we can take a look at the Git plugin is simpler, so we can take a look at the Git app adapter, which again should be renamed Explorer adapter. And you can see here, like the declaration method is, so you can see that it's got this Git gateway concept that's not part of the interface, but it gets to store whatever it likes. So it's going to store a Git gateway. Its load method, now it constructs some URLs, and then it like loads some data from the backend. And the dynamic adapter has this description function that it calls with a bunch of extra information like the Git repository and the Git gateway.
One might also ask the question of why the adapters are separate. Why do we have a separate Explorer adapter from the analysis adapter? And I don't remember whether that was always the case. They might have just been one previously. But,
No, I split them apart, actually.
Yeah.
And the reason that I split them apart is because, so one of the big things that I'm trying to do, although I haven't actually been putting that much time into it, ooh, maybe my coding walkthrough will be creating the PageRank graph. That'd be a cool one.
Oh yeah, that would be.
So let's see. So I really want to be able to run SourceCred on the back end without being coupled to any kind of front end stuff. And the big benefit there would be, for example, we talked earlier in this Hangout about having a tool that would generate a little like SVG that you could embed in a README showing the cred rankings for the project. To do that, we really want to be able to run SourceCred on the back end and not in the browser. And right now we have the logic for generating scores is kind of coupled with the fact that it runs in the front end. And so I've been gradually trying to pull apart those pieces of logic. And so the dependency on React and the fact that we need to have these node description functions, it's very important for the Explorer, but it really has no place being involved in the backend code path. And so that's why I split. We previously just had one kind of adapter, but I split out the analysis adapter, which is just used for computing scores, versus the Explorer adapter, aka app adapter right now, which is involved when you are actually doing the whole front-end experience.
I have to take off, but thanks for hosting this. This was good. Good to meet you, Brian.
You too. Good to meet you.
Thanks for joining us, William. Yeah, Brian, any more questions you'd like to ask? Or, of course, anyone else have questions you'd like to ask?
I was actually going to +1 though on doing that that particular issue as if you want to do a coding exercise. That issue is pretty dense. It'd be really interesting to see you work through that.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool because also like PageRank is a really interesting algorithm, and that it would be really embedded, and it would also get into a lot of like API design stuff that I find quite interesting. So yeah, I think I'll post a time, maybe like next Wednesday or Thursday, and I'll probably block out at least 2 hours for it because it's not a trivial issue. And then I'd also get it software testing, and I'd, that'd be fun. I get to show off my development environment. It's quite nice. Cool. Yeah. Any other questions?
I had a weird one about I was gonna actually submit a PR today, but the test altered a snapshot that we have.
Mm-hmm.
How do I should we update the snapshot when that happens and sort of just manually look at it and say this is correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Just always update the snapshot, take a look at it, and then this is one of the things that when we do code review, if there's a snapshot change, then whoever's reviewing it will review the change to the snapshot. We've tried to be judicious in our use of snapshot testing so that hopefully the diff won't be too noisy. I also saw in the Discord you asked about serialization and deserialization. Do you still want to talk about that?
If you want to go over the significance of that, yeah.
Sure. So let's use graph as an example. So basically, serialization and deserialization, what that means is that we want to have a way of, so natively graphs live in memory, right? And so a graph is actually an instance of a JavaScript class, and it's got all these properties. It's got, an ES6 set attached to it. It's got these 3 ES6 maps. It's got a couple additional properties. And it's really important to us that we be able to save graphs to disk and then reload them. And so generally speaking, we serialize when we want to take something out of memory and make a fixed copy that we can save to disk. And deserialization is the process by which we go and reload it from disk. And so in the case of a graph, for instance, the command line tool that generates a graph needs to have a format that it can save it to, that then the front end can reload when it actually wants to use that graph to assign cred. And so that's we classically call these methods to.json and graph and from JSON. And so in this case, we've defined this data type of a graph JSON, and we can go up and look at where's graph JSON defined, and it basically has a list of nodes as this quote unquote address JSON, and a list of edges as indexed edge JSON. And since we're just talking about this high level, I'm not going to get into the details of how we represent it. But now we have the to.json method. You call it on a graph, and it gives you back this JavaScript object, which is a serialization of the graph. That is all the same information, but now it's just a regular piece of JSON that you can write to disk. Whereas, this is what I'm about to show you is one of the many really awful things in JavaScript. But let's say we have a map, x equals new map. And we're going to set some keys, and it's, x.set of 5 equals foo. And now what happens if we do JSON.stringify of x? It becomes the empty object. In my mind, this is incomprehensibly bad. But that is what it does. This is so bad because if you can't do a decent job, you should just throw an error. Just silently giving you back an empty object is pretty much never what anyone wants for their map. Sorry, there are a lot of decisions in ES6 that are really bad, in my opinion. But so in any case, this is why we have to have this method that goes and actually implements logic for turning all of these maps into actual serializable objects. And the converse is that we have this from JSON method, and that takes a graph JSON. You'll notice it's a static method. So, if I have x equals new graph, and this is obviously going to fail because I don't have graph defined, but let's pretend that it didn't, then I can do x.trueJSON, and I would get the graph JSON. But if I want to make a graph from the JSON, then I just do graph.fromJSON. So that's not any particular graph, that's the class graph, and then I would put in my JSON, and then I'd have my deserialized graph. The other thing that's kind of interesting is we have this util called compat. And basically what it does is let's imagine that we have serialized a graph. And then in between serializing and deserializing that graph, we make a change to the code. that changes the format of the graph JSON. Then when you try to deserialize that old graph, you'll probably get some kind of weird error. And it'll be a really confusing error because it won't actually have anything to do with what your graph was, and it won't even be a bug in the code. It'll just be that the code changed and you're now looking at an old format. And we wanted to, actually specifically, I wanted to prevent this class of error from being confusing. And so we defined these compat modules that let you specify a compat info. And in this case, we're on version 4 of the graph. And so now if you try to load an old graph, then it will fail. And it'll say you're trying to load like a version 030 graph when the current version is 04. And so the reason it's 04 is because we actually have changed the format of how we serialize graphs at least 3 times. So that's just an extra little detail in how we do serialization. Traditionally, we do a lot of serialization across the project because just needing to persist data is a pretty common need. And so what we'll usually do is we'll have these round, we'll have these round trip tests where we like create a graph. And then, so here we're both expecting it to match snapshot because at this point, it's like a pretty stable format. If there's any change in the way it represents, we really want to see that and probably have a test fail. But we also have these round trip tests where we'll test that like, okay, you know, we have equality defined for graphs and we have equality defined for JSON. So let's check that if we take a graph and make it into JSON and then take that JSON and make it back into a graph, then that new graph should be the same as the old graph. And then similarly, if we take the graph, the new graph, and put that back into JSON, then the new JSON should be same as the original JSON. And this is a pretty common pattern that we use across the code base for testing that our serialization and deserialization works as intended. Any more questions? Cool. Then I will say thank you very much for all attending SourceCred's inaugural office hours. It was great to have you. We'll schedule another one for 2 weeks from today, and I'll just put that detail on the SourceCred/mission repository. And Brian, I will get a copy of the recording to you sometime today. And thank you very much for volunteering to take notes. Appreciate it and value it a lot.
Will the recording be made available
Yes,
to everyone besides Brian? Great. Lovely.
Yeah, I'll send it to Brian and also just upload it to YouTube. And maybe what I'll do is I'll upload it to YouTube and send the link to Brian. That could be one fewer task. But yeah, that will be put online shortly.
Lovely.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Later, y'all.
Adios.